Samantha had always been the type of person who prided herself on her energy. As a 34-year-old woman living in the heart of the city, she had built a routine around work, exercise, and spending quality time with friends. She woke up every morning at 6:30 a.m., made herself a cup of coffee, and went for a quick run through the park. The rhythm of her day was familiar and comforting. After her morning workout, she would shower, get ready for work, and head out to her job as a marketing manager at a growing tech company. In the office, Samantha thrived. Her coworkers often admired her ability to juggle multiple projects at once, staying focused and driven throughout the day. Her energy seemed to never fade. At least, that was the case up until a few months ago. At first, it was a subtle change, the kind of thing that could be easily dismissed. It started when Samantha began feeling a bit more tired than usual toward the end of her workday. It was nothing alarming, just a slight dip in energy. She would still go for a jog after work or meet her friends for dinner, but when the evening came, there was a nagging feeling in her legs. They felt heavy, like they were filled with lead, unwilling to cooperate with her usual pace. The sensation didn't necessarily hurt, but it was noticeable. Initially, she chalked it up to the long hours she was putting in at the office. Work had been demanding, with new projects and deadlines constantly stacking up. Maybe it was just the physical strain of sitting at her desk for hours, or the fact that she was spending so much time on her feet during meetings and client calls. There was no reason to panic, she thought, but the heaviness didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to increase the later the night went on. After dinner, as she settled into her couch to watch some television or read a book, her legs felt as if they were sinking into the cushions, weighed down by something that wasn't there. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The tiredness wasn't just in her mind, it was in her body. Something was off. Samantha decided to pay closer attention to her health. She thought back to her typical day. Perhaps it was simply that she wasn't getting enough sleep, or maybe her exercise routine wasn't balanced enough. As someone who took her fitness seriously, she was puzzled. Her morning runs, while short and relatively low intensity, had always served as a way to clear her mind and boost her energy. Her diet, too, was healthy, mostly plant-based meals with lean proteins, lots of vegetables, and the occasional indulgence in her favorite dessert. If anything, her lifestyle was far from sedentary. But still, the heaviness in her legs persisted. And soon, it wasn't just a nightly occurrence. During the day, after sitting at her desk for hours, she began to notice a subtle swelling in her ankles. It wasn't drastic, but it was there, like her skin was being stretched too tightly over her bones. At first, she brushed it off as a minor inconvenience, the sort of thing she could probably fix with a bit of stretching or some time spent elevating her legs. But when the swelling didn't go away, she started to worry. By the end of the week, the heaviness had become something that was hard to ignore. It wasn't just her legs, it was her entire body. She had trouble sleeping, tossing and turning throughout the night. When she did manage to fall asleep, she would wake up in the morning feeling as if she hadn't rested at all. Her muscles ached, and the familiar weight in her legs was still there, gnawing at her with every step she took. One night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized how much of an impact this feeling was having on her life. It wasn't just physical. Her energy levels were plummeting, her motivation dwindling, and she felt mentally drained. Samantha had always been someone who took charge of her own health, never one to let small problems go unchecked. But this felt different. Something about it felt beyond the usual aches and pains she was used to after a hard day. The heaviness in her legs was persistent, unrelenting, and the fatigue was deeper than she had ever experienced. She wondered if it was stress. Work had been particularly demanding lately, with new product launches and major presentations looming on the horizon. She had been putting in longer hours, and the pressure was starting to take its toll. But could stress really cause this kind of physical symptom? Could it actually make her legs feel this heavy and her body this tired? She didn't know. Samantha wasn't one to panic, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that something didn't quite add up. She hadn't been feeling like herself lately, and it wasn't just the usual work-related fatigue. No, this felt different, more serious. It was as though her body was trying to tell her something something she couldn't ignore any longer. She started Googling her symptoms. It was probably a bad idea, she knew, but she couldn't help herself. Legs feel heavy at night. She typed into the search bar, unsure of what to expect. A series of articles popped up, some explaining the condition as simple muscle fatigue, others discussing possible circulatory problems, and a few that warned about more serious issues like heart disease. Samantha skimmed through them, her heart rate quickening as she read through the descriptions. Some of the articles mentioned how leg heaviness could be a sign of venous insufficiency, where the veins in the legs fail to effectively return blood to the heart. Others referenced problems with circulation and heart function. She clicked on one of the links that seemed particularly alarming. It detailed how problems with the circulatory system could cause blood to pool in the legs, leading to symptoms like swelling, heaviness, and fatigue. The article also noted that these symptoms could be a sign of heart failure or other heart-related issues, though it emphasized that many of the causes were treatable with lifestyle changes or medication. The words heart failure echoed in her mind as she closed her laptop. For a moment, she sat in silence, unsure of what to think. Her grandmother had suffered from heart disease in her later years, and her mother had a history of high blood pressure, but Samantha had always been active and in good health. She had no reason to suspect that her own heart was in trouble. Still, the nagging heaviness in her legs wouldn't go away. It wasn't just a fleeting inconvenience anymore. It was something that was impacting her daily life. After much deliberation, Samantha decided that it was time to see a doctor. She knew it could be something as simple as stress or poor circulation, but she also knew that she couldn't ignore the possibility that something more serious was going on. The next morning, she called her doctor's office and scheduled an appointment. As she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. At least she was taking action, and maybe, just maybe, she would get some answers. Little did she know, the journey ahead would be more revealing than she had anticipated, forcing her to confront not only her physical health, but also her deeper fears about what her body was trying to tell her. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, even after she made the appointment with her doctor. She tried to distract herself with work, with her usual routine, but the heaviness in her legs continued to linger. Every day seemed like a repetition of the last, each one marked by the same dull weight in her legs, the same swelling in her feet, and the same exhaustion that seemed to creep up on her without warning. She had always prided herself on her energy, but now she felt like a shadow of her former self, struggling to find the strength to push through the simplest tasks. As the days passed, the swelling in her legs began to worsen. What started as a slight puffiness around her ankles had now spread up to her calves. The discomfort wasn't excruciating, but it was unmistakable. She could feel the pressure building, like her skin was stretched too tight, as if it was on the verge of tearing. At night, when she lay in bed, she found it nearly impossible to get comfortable. She would toss and turn, her legs restless and aching, as if they couldn't find a position that would relieve the constant pressure. The sensation became even more pronounced the longer she stayed still, and her mind couldn't help but wander to the worst-case scenario. It was hard to ignore the possibility that something more serious might be at play. When Samantha first started experiencing the symptoms, she tried to remain rational. Maybe it was just fatigue, she told herself. Maybe she was overthinking it. After all, it wasn't uncommon to feel a little off after a busy week at work. But now, with the swelling spreading and the discomfort increasing, she couldn't help but wonder, could this be something more than just stress or muscle strain? It wasn't the kind of thing Samantha typically worried about. She had always been healthy, never one to fall ill or struggle with any significant medical issues. But as the heaviness in her legs grew more pronounced, she began to question her assumptions. Could she really be this out of touch with her own body? Had she been ignoring something that had been building for longer than she realized? The turning point came one evening after a particularly long day at work. Samantha had spent hours in back-to-back meetings, coordinating with clients, brainstorming with her team, and making sure everything was running smoothly. By the time she got home, she felt mentally and physically drained, her head pounding and her legs aching from the constant pressure. She didn't even have the energy to change out of her work clothes. Instead, she collapsed onto the couch and let her body sink into the cushions, hoping for some respite. As she sat there, trying to focus on the television, Samantha noticed something unusual. Her feet, which had been swollen earlier in the day, were now almost unrecognizable. They were puffed up, and her ankles looked as though they were about to burst from the pressure. She gingerly pressed her fingers into her skin, feeling the indents of her touch remain for longer than usual. It wasn't just swelling. It felt like her blood wasn't circulating properly, like it was pooling in her legs, unable to make its way back up to her heart. Panic slowly began to settle in. She hadn't yet reached for her phone to search for answers, but the thought was there, nagging at her. She had always been cautious about self-diagnosing, but this felt different. This felt real. She picked up her phone and started typing. Why do my legs feel heavy at night? Why are my feet swelling? Her search results were immediate. She scrolled past links for everyday muscle fatigue and overworked legs, eventually landing on an article titled, "Leg heaviness could be a sign of circulatory issues. Here's what you need to know." The title alone sent a shiver down her spine. As she clicked on the link, her heart raced. She started reading the first few lines and immediately felt her stomach tighten. The article explained how conditions like venous insufficiency could cause blood to pool in the legs, leading to symptoms like swelling, fatigue, and heaviness, especially after prolonged periods of standing or sitting. As she continued reading, she noticed that many of the symptoms she had been experiencing were listed as possible signs of venous insufficiency. But what really caught her attention was the mention of how untreated circulatory issues could eventually lead to more serious conditions like heart failure. Samantha's mind went blank. Heart failure? She had never even considered that possibility. Sure, her family had a history of heart disease, but she had always thought of herself as being immune to those kinds of health problems. She was active, healthy, and young. Heart failure seemed so distant, so far removed from her reality. She skimmed the rest of the article, learning that venous insufficiency often develops slowly over time, especially in people who led sedentary lifestyles or had jobs that required long periods of standing or sitting. The condition, while not always life-threatening, could cause significant discomfort and lead to complications if left untreated. Samantha's mind raced as she processed this new information. Her job required her to sit at a desk for hours, and although she took regular breaks to stretch and move, perhaps it wasn't enough. Her mind was already flooded with worry. Could this be a sign of something more serious? Was it possible that her heart wasn't working as efficiently as it should be? Could this heaviness, this swelling, be a warning that her circulatory system was failing? She quickly scrolled through the rest of the symptoms listed on the article, ticking them off in her mind. Shortness of breath, fatigue, swelling in the lower legs, cold feet or hands, difficulty sleeping. It was hard to believe, but some of these sounded familiar. By the time she finished reading the article, Samantha felt a knot form in her stomach. She was no longer just concerned about the heaviness in her legs. She was terrified that it was part of a larger, more dangerous problem. A problem she had been ignoring for far too long. Samantha knew she needed to see a doctor. She had no idea what the issue was or what it might mean for her long-term health, but she knew she couldn't wait any longer. She made an appointment with her general practitioner, Dr. Thompson, the next day, hoping to get to the bottom of what was happening. As she put the phone down, she realized that the thought of seeing a doctor didn't bring her the sense of relief she had expected. Instead, it only deepened her anxiety. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what the doctor might say, but she knew she had to face the truth. The next morning, she woke up feeling drained, her legs still heavy, the swelling still present. She decided to take the day off work to rest, hoping that a little downtime might help. She spent most of the day on the couch, elevating her legs as much as she could, but the relief she had hoped for never came. The heaviness lingered, a constant reminder that something wasn't quite right. By the time her appointment with Dr. Thompson came around, Samantha was already mentally preparing herself for bad news. As she sat in the waiting room, her mind raced through the possibilities. Was this venous insufficiency? Heart disease? Something worse? It was hard to know. The heaviness in her legs had taken on a life of its own, and the fear that it might be a sign of something serious loomed over her like a cloud. Dr. Thompson was kind, professional, and attentive when Samantha finally saw him. She explained her symptoms: the swelling, the heaviness, the fatigue. He listened carefully, asking about her work habits, her physical activity, and her family medical history. After a thorough examination, he explained that while her symptoms were concerning, it was still too early to draw any definitive conclusions. He ordered several tests to check for any circulatory or heart-related issues, suggesting that they rule out conditions like venous insufficiency or peripheral artery disease. Despite his calm demeanor, Samantha couldn't shake the unease that settled in her chest. She had wanted answers, but now that she was faced with the possibility of something serious, she wasn't sure she was ready for them. As she left the doctor's office, her mind swirled with questions. What would the tests show? Was this just a temporary issue, or was it the start of something much more troubling? The days after Samantha's doctor's appointment felt like an endless blur. Each morning she would wake up with a sense of dread, her legs still heavy and swollen from the previous day. No matter how much she tried to reassure herself, the worry gnawed at her from the inside. She was doing what she could, resting, elevating her legs, trying to focus on the advice Dr. Thompson had given her. But the fear that something more serious was at play kept creeping into her mind. The waiting for the test results was the hardest part. After the initial examination, Dr. Thompson had been careful to keep his tone neutral. He was reassuring, yet honest. He told her that it was crucial to determine the root cause of her symptoms, but he had not made any hasty judgments. Still, that knowledge didn't calm her nerves. She found herself counting the hours until she would hear back from his office, each tick of the clock adding weight to the growing uncertainty that had settled in her chest. The symptoms hadn't gone away. If anything, they were becoming more pronounced. The heaviness in her legs had shifted into a dull ache, almost like a constant throb beneath her skin. When she would stand for long periods of time, she could feel her calves growing tight and stiff, as if they were struggling to carry her weight. She had always been in tune with her body, so this strange, foreign sensation made her uneasy. Samantha had never been a hypochondriac, but this was different. This felt real. She spent the next several days alternating between worrying over the worst-case scenarios and trying to distract herself with work. Her office had become a blur of faces and tasks. She had become adept at forcing a smile and carrying on with her responsibilities, but her mind was never fully engaged. When she wasn't at work, she spent hours researching her symptoms, reading article after article on venous insufficiency, heart failure, and circulatory disorders. Each piece of information felt like a small puzzle piece fitting into a larger picture that she couldn't quite understand. That Thursday, just after lunch, her phone rang with the number she had been waiting for. Dr. Thompson's office. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked up, bracing herself for the news that she had been expecting, but hoping, deep down, wouldn't be true. "Hello, Samantha." Dr. Thompson's voice was calm, professional as always. "I reviewed your test results, and we need to talk about next steps." Samantha's stomach tightened at the mention of next steps. She braced herself for the worst. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Everything's okay, but we need to look into this further," he replied. "Your test results showed some signs that need to be addressed. You're experiencing symptoms that are consistent with early-stage venous insufficiency. That's when the veins in your legs don't return blood to the heart as efficiently as they should. It's not uncommon, especially if you have a job that requires long periods of sitting or standing. I'm going to refer you to a vascular specialist to determine the extent of the problem." Samantha exhaled slowly, trying to process his words. Venous insufficiency. It wasn't heart failure, which was what she had feared, but it was still something serious. She had hoped the test results would bring her reassurance, but instead, they only seemed to deepen her sense of uncertainty. "Does that mean I'm at risk for something worse?" she asked, her voice small. "Not necessarily," Dr. Thompson responded. "Venous insufficiency can be managed effectively, especially if it's caught early. The good news is that it's treatable with lifestyle changes and, if necessary, medical procedures. But we do need to be proactive about managing it. Samantha felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with lingering anxiety. It wasn't heart failure, but the thought of managing a chronic condition, one that could get worse over time, was unsettling. She had always thought of herself as invincible, as someone who could take care of her body through exercise and diet. But now, her body was betraying her, and she felt powerless. "I understand," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I'll make an appointment with the specialist." "Good," he replied. "I'll send a referral over to the vascular clinic. They'll contact you soon. In the meantime, try to elevate your legs whenever you can and avoid long periods of standing or sitting. Keep up with your exercise, but be mindful not to overdo it." Samantha hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. She was grateful that it wasn't as serious as she had feared, but there was still a gnawing sense of worry. Venous insufficiency wasn't something she had ever given much thought to, but now it seemed to be taking over her life. The constant ache in her legs, the swelling, the fatigue, all of it seemed to be tied to this diagnosis. The following week, Samantha visited the vascular clinic. She was nervous but determined to learn more about her condition. The clinic was a quiet, sterile space, the walls lined with medical charts and diagrams of the human circulatory system. After filling out a series of forms and undergoing a brief initial consultation, she was led into an examination room where a nurse prepped her for an ultrasound of her legs. Ultrasound technology would give the specialist a clearer picture of the blood flow in her veins, allowing him to determine the severity of her venous insufficiency. Samantha lay back on the examination table, trying to relax as the cold gel was applied to her legs. She could feel the coolness of the gel seep through her skin, but it did little to calm her racing heart. The technician moved the ultrasound wand over her legs, pressing it gently into different areas of her calves and thighs. Samantha stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about what the results might show. She had read that venous insufficiency could be caused by a number of factors, including prolonged periods of sitting or standing, obesity, pregnancy, or even genetics. But she hadn't considered how much her lifestyle, working in an office job that required her to sit for long hours, might contribute to the condition. Finally, the technician removed the wand and cleaned her legs. "The doctor will review the images with you," she said with a reassuring smile before leaving the room. Samantha waited anxiously for the specialist to arrive. When he finally walked in, he introduced himself as Dr. Hargrove, a vascular surgeon with years of experience in treating venous disorders. "Hello, Samantha," he said, offering a warm handshake. "I've had a chance to review the ultrasound, and I'd like to discuss your results with you." Samantha nodded, trying to keep her anxiety in check. Dr. Hargrove sat down and pulled up the images on the screen, pointing to different areas of her legs where the blood flow seemed to be impaired. "From the ultrasound, it's clear that you're experiencing early-stage venous insufficiency," Dr. Hargrove explained. "The veins in your lower legs are not pumping blood back to your heart as efficiently as they should. This is causing the blood to pool in your legs, leading to the heaviness and swelling you've been feeling." Samantha felt a wave of relief. It wasn't a life-threatening condition, at least not at this stage. But the reality of her situation settled in. This wasn't something that would go away on its own. She would have to manage it for the long term. "So what's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "First, we'll start with conservative treatments," Dr. Hargrove replied. "Compression stockings can help improve blood flow, and I recommend increasing your physical activity to keep the blood circulating properly. If you haven't already, I'd also suggest elevating your legs as often as possible to reduce swelling." Samantha took a deep breath. She had already been following some of these recommendations on her own, but hearing them from a specialist made the reality of her condition even more real. "Are there any more serious treatments if this doesn't improve?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "In some cases, if conservative measures don't help, we may consider more advanced treatments such as sclerotherapy or surgery," Dr. Hargrove explained. "But let's take this one step at a time. I'm confident that with the right care and lifestyle changes, we can manage this effectively." Samantha nodded, absorbing the information. She was grateful that it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but there was still the nagging feeling that her life was changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. As she left the clinic, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She didn't know exactly how this would affect her life going forward, but she now had a path forward. She would need to adjust her routine, make sure she took better care of herself, and be mindful of her health in ways she had never been before. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was manageable. And for the first time in weeks, Samantha felt a small spark of hope. The following months after Samantha's diagnosis passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, lifestyle adjustments, and slow, gradual improvements. The heaviness in her legs didn't disappear overnight, but it did begin to fade, little by little, as she committed herself to the treatment plan Dr. Hargrove had laid out. There were days when she still felt discouraged, days when the swelling seemed to return no matter how many times she elevated her legs, or when the discomfort in her calves persisted even after hours of rest. But as time went on, the dark thoughts of something much worse were pushed further and further from her mind. She had learned that while venous insufficiency wasn't easy to live with, it was something she could manage. One of the first changes she made was implementing compression stockings into her daily routine. They felt awkward at first, tight and constricting, but as the weeks went by, they began to feel like an essential part of her day, almost like a shield that protected her from the fatigue and swelling that once dominated her life. She wore them during her workday, under her slacks, and even when she went for her daily walks. The compression helped keep the blood flowing in her legs, preventing it from pooling and causing further discomfort. And it worked. Over time, the constant ache in her calves diminished, and the swelling that once seemed so uncontrollable began to lessen. The stockings weren't a cure, but they were a tool that allowed her to function more normally. Even with the compression stockings, Samantha didn't ignore the other pieces of Dr. Hargrove's advice. She became more intentional about moving throughout the day. She set reminders on her phone to get up every hour and take a short walk, even if it was just a lap around the office. She started going for longer walks during lunch breaks, enjoying the fresh air and the movement that made her feel alive again. The weight in her legs started to feel less oppressive as she committed herself to staying active. However, it wasn't just physical changes that marked this new chapter for Samantha. She had begun to take a different approach to how she viewed her health overall. For years, she had taken her energy for granted, assuming it would always be there, that she could power through anything. But now, she realized that being healthy wasn't just about pushing through challenges. It was about listening to her body and respecting its limits. Samantha began paying more attention to her overall wellness. She made time for the things that nourished her, like preparing healthier meals and focusing on getting enough rest. She'd always been an advocate for work-life balance, but now it felt even more important. She found herself saying no to late-night work projects, prioritizing her own health over the expectations of others. This shift wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. One of the hardest parts was adjusting to the reality of managing a chronic condition. At first, it felt like an invasion of her independence. She didn't want to feel like she had to be careful, like her body had limitations that would slow her down. There were moments when she felt frustrated by the constant need to take breaks, to stretch, to avoid long periods of standing or sitting. It was tempting to pretend everything was fine, to push through and ignore the warning signs. But she had learned that ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. It would only make it worse. It took time for Samantha to embrace this new routine, but eventually she did. She got used to wearing compression stockings every day, even when she wasn't at work, and she began to feel less and less self-conscious about them. She found herself being more open with her colleagues about her condition, explaining that she had to take breaks and why. Surprisingly, they were understanding, even supportive. Some of them even shared their own struggles with health issues, creating a deeper sense of connection. Samantha learned that being vulnerable didn't make her weaker, it made her stronger. But the most significant change was how Samantha started to approach the idea of health. She realized that being healthy wasn't just about looking good or being productive. It was about being kind to herself. She had always been her own harshest critic, always striving for perfection in every aspect of her life, from her work to her personal goals. But now, she was learning to give herself grace. She understood that her body had limitations, and that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was necessary for her to listen to her body and honor it, rather than pushing herself until she reached the breaking point. As the months went on, Samantha continued to monitor her progress with Dr. Hargrove. She had follow-up appointments to check her condition, and each time, he confirmed that her treatment plan was working. The symptoms were under control, and her legs had become less swollen, less fatigued. The discomfort was still there occasionally, but it was no longer a constant presence in her life. Samantha had learned to manage it, and as a result, she felt more empowered. It wasn't just the physical changes that were important, it was the mental shift that had occurred. Samantha had gone from feeling helpless and scared to feeling in control of her own health. She wasn't defined by her condition, but she had learned to incorporate it into her life in a way that allowed her to thrive. She had also started to enjoy her life again. No longer weighed down by the fear that her legs would betray her, she was able to focus on the things that truly mattered: spending time with friends, pursuing hobbies, and traveling. Last month, she took a trip to the coast, something she hadn't done in years. It was a small trip, but it marked a turning point. She was able to walk along the beach without feeling the oppressive weight in her legs, without having to stop every few minutes to rest. She realized then just how far she had come. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had to manage her condition, still had to make adjustments to her routine. But she was no longer defined by it. Venous insufficiency was no longer something that controlled her life. Instead, it had become a part of her life, just another challenge that she had learned to face head-on. One evening, as she sat in her living room, reflecting on everything that had happened, Samantha realized that the heaviness in her legs had become a metaphor for something much larger. Her health struggles had taught her to slow down, to listen to her body, and to care for herself in ways she had never considered before. She had been so focused on achievement and productivity that she had ignored her own well-being. But now, with her legs feeling lighter, her mind felt clearer, and her heart felt fuller. The fear she had felt when she first began this journey had faded. She had faced the uncertainty, the unknown, and had come out stronger on the other side. And while she knew there would be days when the heaviness would return, she was no longer afraid. She had learned how to cope, how to manage, and how to live a life that was both fulfilling and balanced. She had found strength in vulnerability, resilience in acceptance, and peace in the knowledge that her body, though not perfect, was capable of more than she had ever realized. Samantha no longer saw her condition as something to hide or be ashamed of. Instead, it had become a part of her story, a chapter in her life that had shaped her, taught her, and ultimately made her more grateful for the simple, everyday things she had once taken for granted. She was no longer focused on perfection or achieving more. She was focused on living well, on being present, and on nurturing the things that mattered most: her health, her relationships, and her peace of mind. And in that moment, as she closed her eyes and exhaled deeply, she realized that this was exactly where she was meant to be,